The NFL is trending towards reliving the days of the 80s and the 90s when it comes to Super Bowl winners. Hey guys, this is podcast episode number 9. We are currently back on a weekly posting schedule. I'm your host, Trady Collins. This podcast can only be viewed on YouTube at One Man Island Productions. Clips of the podcast can be viewed on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and a bunch of other sites we'll get onto down the line. For this podcast, I want to talk about, as I mentioned earlier, the 80s and the 90s. Because I was on Instagram like a few nights ago, and somebody posted a picture that had guys like Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Eli Manning, Drew Brees, Roethlisberger, Rivers, Flacco, many quarterbacks from the previous generation. So from 2001 to about 2018, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Roethlisberger, Flacco, those were the guys in the AFC specifically represented that conference in the Super Bowls before the new generation entered. You know, guys like Mahomes, Burrow, and many others in their draft class. And what's funny about that is because before that, in 1984 to 1997, you had teams like the Cowboys, Washington, Giants, Packers, 49ers represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. Like a wider gross of teams. One was dominated by quarterbacks and the other was dominated by culture and teams. And I'm talking about that particular era of the 1984 to 1997. So today's topic I've been thinking about for a while is that I think the NFL is on its way in having a dominant team and quarterback dominate the NFL in a specific conference for the next few years. So when you think about quarterbacks, so quarterbacks in today's NFL, they run the league. And if you think back into 1983, you had 6 top quarterbacks drafted in the NFL. John Elway, Jim Kelly, Dan Marino, Ken O'Brien, Tony Eason, and Todd Blackledge. Later, you had Warren Moon, Bernie Kosar, Boomer Esiason that entered the league that made the AFC more competitive as far as top quarterbacks and competitive teams. They were all good, all-time great quarterback talents. While that was happening, the NFC began dominating the NFL and in the Super Bowl, going on a 13 straight championship winning streak. Now again, the NFL was different back then. Running backs were the centerpiece of the offense. Defensive backs had a fighting chance on down the field throws. Defenders in general had a better chance in defending and actually hitting opposing quarterbacks, opposing players. There wasn't defenseless rules. And not to mention, there wasn't a salary cap until like the mid-90s. What I'm saying is that the NFL may be heading towards a similar type of situation where the quarterback play is dominant in the AFC and in one particular conference dominates the NFL as far as culture. Whether we like it or not, the NFL has softened its rules so that quarterbacks can have a Madden-style stats. Who knows, 10 years from now, flag football could be the NFL. Back in the 80s and 90s, a dominant run game, a top 10 defense, and hell, even a solid quarterback was good enough to win a Super Bowl. I mean, Phil Sims. Phil Sims won a Super Bowl. Now, he was never in an MVP conversation consistently in his career. Doug Williams had a few good seasons in Tampa before he got to Washington, and then he became a Super Bowl champion, but he didn't do anything after that. Mark Rippon had one good season. Jeff Hostetler had about 2 good seasons, but he wasn't consistent, even when he did win a Super Bowl with the Giants. In today's game, top quarterbacks, elite wide receiver, a very good offensive line protection, enough stops on defense, that wins Super Bowls. So let's talk about quarterbacks in the AFC. And I'm going to go back to the 80s just to paint a picture of what I'm trying to talk about here. The NFC during the 80s and 90s had good quarterbacks, but the AFC had way more talented ones. John Elway, Hall of Famer. Dan Marino, Hall of Famer. Vernon Kosar had about good 8 seasons in the NFL. Warren Moon, Hall of Famer. Jim Kelly, Hall of Famer. Boone Somerson, MVP. Jim Zorn and Dave Craig had some good years. In the NFC, you had Montana, Aikman, Favre, Cunningham, Joe Theismann. I mean, only 3 of those are MVPs. And hell, Aikman is probably the weaker of the 3 Hall of Famers coming out of that list of names I gave you. Hell, John Elway didn't win his first Super Bowl until his final 2 years in the league. But the reason why he won those is not because he was great, it's because he had an elite running back and a quality offensive line, good defense, among other things. Those are the teams that were winning those Super Bowls is if you had those elements. The 85 Bears had Jim McMahon, now Hall of Famer. Hell, rarely made Pro Bowls. Parcells Giants, defense, run game. The Hogs, great offensive line, run game, very good defense. 49ers had a Hall of Fame quarterback, but he also had great defense. Jimmy Johnson's Cowboys, run game, defense. Packers, even though Brett Favre was winning a lot of MVPs, he wasn't alone in that. When he won his first and only Super Bowl, number 1 defense, number 1 offense. A good complement on both sides of the ball. Think about today's game now. Because you can't play defense the way you can, and because running the football primarily doesn't always win championships, I mean, it can if it's only relegated to a Super Bowl instead of a season-long arc. Things are different. Think about this now. Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, just to name a few. Those are quarterbacks in the AFC. I think 3 or 4 of them won't even make the playoffs. There's always something going on in the conference. Stranger things have happened. NFC is Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, Matt Stafford, Jared Goff. That's about it. Maybe there's more, but they're not high-end quarterbacks. Hell, none of those quarterbacks I mentioned in the NFC won an MVP. Rodgers got 4. Mahomes got 2. Joe Burrow's going to get 1. Lamar Jackson has 1. I mean, let's think about this now. One productive season does not absolve previous failures. Tua is going to be, if he has another good season, going to be in the conversation, going to add probably 10 quarterbacks. And you know what's crazy about this whole situation is that the unfortunate reality is one of those quarterbacks that I mentioned, Mahomes, Burrow, Herbert, Lawrence, Jackson, Allen, Watson, those guys, you know what's crazy about that? Is that maybe one of them, maybe 2, are going to retire without a ring. There's plenty of teams and plenty of players that have never won a ring. Dan Fouts, the Air Coryell offense, never played in a Super Bowl. Fran Tarkenton in the 70s Vikings played in 4, Tarkenton 3, never won one. Kelly in the 90s Bills, 4 straight losses. Randall Cunningham in the Eagles had good seasons, sometimes great seasons. Some may say the best team to probably never make a really deep playoff run, never even make a conference game, never even won a championship. Not everyone will get their flowers, unfortunately. They will get Hall of Fame votes, MVP honors, and awards, etc. But the Super Bowl, even the best never win. And that's exactly what I'm trying to say is that the NFL has changed so much that back then having a run game, top defense, and average quarterback was enough to get you in a Super Bowl conversation. And hell, even in the early 2000s, you had Trent Dilfer and Brad Johnson, Matt Hasselbeck guys can make the Super Bowl. Donovan McNabb was probably mid-tier, but he still made a good push for a championship. But nowadays, these quarterbacks, the rules changes, the way the offenses are executing plays, it's just different. It's a new efficient way of progressing the game. And because a lot of these precision passers are in the AFC, I think it's going to be dominated by the AFC for the next maybe decade. You'll have maybe your Eagles may win a championship here or there. You may have, who knows, maybe the Cowboys get back to a championship. Maybe the Lions surprise someone and make their first Super Bowl championship. But really, you really think Mahomes is going to stay at 2? I mean, Joe Burrow's gonna get his will get his due soon. Josh Allen has a good team. He might get his due soon. Justin Herbert, I don't maybe hope so. I don't know. Maybe Trevor Lawrence. Who knows? It's crazy. Just the amount of talent in the NFL. And the thing is that like somebody is gonna not win a championship. They're gonna be screwed over by either bad play by on their own end, or the front office is not gonna do their job. I mean, I think the Bengals, they're known to be cheap, and they're gonna have to start paying money if they want to keep the squad that they want. Andy Reid is not gonna be around forever. The Bills just have a history of being resilient instead of actually winning championships. The Chargers just are doing all do Charger things. I mean, there's a lot of things working against teams that's gonna like suppress and just downright prevent a championship for certain quarterbacks, and certain quarterbacks are gonna overcome it. And it's gonna be interesting to see over the next, I'd say, 5-10 years, what Super Bowls come out of the conference. Because think about this now. I think Brady was dominant. So I think after Brady left New England, it went to Chiefs, and then it went to the Bucks, went back to the Rams, and then it's back to the Chiefs. And before then, it was flip-flopping, but it was mostly AFC teams dominating because you have Manning, Brady, Flacco, and Roethlisberger. Because a lot of the top quarterbacks and top teams were in that conference. I personally think it's going to go that trend again. But just to think, imagine those quarterbacks I mentioned earlier in the podcast, maybe the first part of it. I think the 1983 class with John Elway, Jim Kelly, Dan Marino, Ken O'Brien, Tony Eason, Todd Blackledge, Warren Moon, Bernie Kosar, Boomer Esiason. Imagine if those quarterbacks were in a system where that was very quarterback friendly instead of a very, gritty, between the line of scrimmage kind of rugby style football play. Yeah, they're probably have better stats. They might win more. I mean, who knows? Maybe Kosar actually gets to a championship. Maybe Warren Moon actually gets to a Super Bowl. Maybe Dan Marino actually wins a Super Bowl. The thought of like a lot of these quarterbacks and being pioneers in the era of their time. I mean, Elway to me was Patrick Mahomes before Patrick Mahomes. Dan Marino, to a degree, was like Joe Burrow before Joe Burrow, or before Justin Herbert. I mean, I think Justin Herbert is like the modern day Dan Fouts, or like the new reincarnated Phillip Rivers. There's a lot of quarterbacks back then where you wonder, man, what would it be like if they played in today's game? Because that's insanely incredible and just awesome and wonderful to think about. Because everybody would love to see Dan Marino win a ring. Hell, some people say he'll throw 60 touchdown passes in today's game. Elway, he might have better stats in today's game. Ken O'Brien might last longer in the NFL. It's just Jim Kelly might actually win a Super Bowl. You never know. With salary cap rules, different things, you never know what's going to happen. But yeah, that's exactly what I want to talk about, and it's just something that's just always pierced my mind. And I mentioned some comparisons earlier. I've always felt like Justin Herbert was the modern day Dan Fouts. Patrick Mahomes is like the modern day John Elway. Josh Allen is the modern day Jim Kelly. Aaron Rodgers is a modern day Steve Young. Lamar Jackson is like Randall Cunningham to me. Dak Prescott is Danny White, only because they're following quarterbacks that are more beloved than they are, and they're not getting the credit that they did deserve. Kirk Cousins is like Bernie Kosar, good quarterbacks, but can't get over the hump, and it's going to be labeled as a certain way, but won't get credit for all the accomplishments that they did have in their careers. That I tried making more comparisons, but those are the ones that came to mind. Thank you for listening to the podcast Island episode number 9. I'm planning on talking about predictions for the NFL season in about a few weeks. I think September 2nd is the final weekend without a regular season game, so I'm going to talk about that. My predictions for the NFL season on September 2nd. This podcast can only be viewed on YouTube in full. Clips can be shared on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts. I'll put some on LinkedIn among other stuff. I'm trying to expand and trying to turn this thing into something special. Thank you for listening. This will be one more shorter podcast. Once again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys in the future.